It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation archives are filled with some terrifying monsters. Even the deadliest creatures can, in theory, be defeated, or at least soundly avoided. After all, they're just flesh and blood, or in some cases, metal or concrete. But what if reality as you know it one day just broke? Or worse, you were transported to a reality so frightening and alien to our own that death seemed like the only escape, but you couldn't even give yourself that. This brings us to today's topic, the terrifying alternate reality of SCP-3001. The Foundation is no stranger to freaky alternate dimensions, but what was experienced by Joint Lead Researcher Dr. Robert Scranton at Site-120 is a truly unique nightmare. Co-managed by his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, Site-120 is a facility largely designated for research into SCPs with dangerous reality warping capabilities in order to mitigate future containment breaches. Reality warpers are among some of the more perplexing and dangerous SCPs, from the pocket dimension creating SCP-106 to the SCP creating Dr. Wondertainment and everything in between. Scranton and Lang's goal to further study such entities was an admirable one, if a little overambitious. And on January 2, 2000, during the testing of a new technology created by the Foundation's leading power couple, disaster finally struck. Scranton and Lang had already been the brains behind one of the Foundation's most valuable tools in the fight against reality-bending SCPs, the Scranton Reality Anchors. Their follow-up, the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer, or LSS, likely would have been an even more advanced variant of their earlier invention, and should have been a huge success for the team. But things didn't turn out that way. Dr. Scranton and several other researchers were gathered in Reality Lab A performing routine tests on the LSS prototypes. While other technicians ran diagnostics tests, Scranton stood at the control panel, the blinking red light above the console confirming that everything was going according to plan. But as anyone who's fallen victim to one of the Foundation's many anomalies will tell you, just because you've done everything correctly doesn't mean you're safe. Scranton began operating the machine, not knowing that something was rumbling up towards him from below. Without warning, a sudden, unexpected burst of seismic activity rocked the entire base. Researchers grabbed onto whatever was closest as the world shook around them. In his panic, Dr. Scranton clung to the LSS control panel as the seismic blast fried the circuits and kicked it into overdrive. There was a blast of magnificent blinding light, and when the rumbling stopped, not only was the doctor gone, he had been erased from reality as we know it. The earthquake had caused a deadly malfunction in the machine meant to stabilize reality, and instead tore a rift in it, dragging the unfortunate doctor and the control panel into oblivion. His wife, Dr. Lang, and the many researchers who idolized him were devastated by his unexpected demise at the hand of what should have been his crowning achievement. The one silver lining was that this reality-ripping event had almost definitely eliminated the doctor quickly and painlessly. As far as the Foundation and his loved ones were concerned, Scranton's death had been immediate and complete, a luxury afforded to few Foundation employees who die anomalous deaths. But sadly, that isn't how Dr. Scranton's story, or the story of SCP-3001, ends. No, this is where it all begins. How do we know all this? In the hellish new place where Scranton had been transported, the control panel from the LSS that he'd been clinging to for dear life had been transported with him, and continued to record audio data from this anomalous location. Not that Dr. Scranton realized it, not at first anyway. As far as he knew, he'd suddenly been transported into a pitch-black location. No sights, no sounds, no sense. True nothingness. At first, the doctor was confused. One second he was testing out his new technology, and the next he was quite literally nowhere. In spite of his current situation, the doctor was still an intelligent and rational man. He took a moment to compose himself, hoping that in time his eyes would adjust to the new darkness around him. But that moment never came. The darkness remained perfectly absolute. Much like the darkness in another reality-defying SCP, the deadly endless staircase known as SCP-087, the dark seemed thick, almost like you could touch it. The doctor, not wanting to give himself to despair and die in this impossible place, and with no other options seemingly available, began walking. Either he'd find his way out, or the Foundation would find him. No need to panic. It may have altered the doctor's temperament if he knew that the Foundation already assumed he was dead, and that no search party was going to come looking for him. Still, logic dictates that if a person walks for long enough, they're bound to find something. The problem Scranton was about to face was that SCP-3001 doesn't run by any kind of conventional logic. He walked and walked and walked, but he didn't seem to get any nearer to or farther from anything. But how could he even know? After all, in total darkness, there aren't any landmarks to assist in navigation. The doctor walked and paced and screamed for days on end, but he made no progress. He was alone in an empty world. He had no choice though, so he kept walking and walking and walking for 11 days. During that time, he felt his hunger and thirst grow. He was in terrible pain from a mix of starvation and dehydration, but the release of death didn't seem to come for him. He was going to have to learn the rules of this new place the hard way, and it grimly dawned on Dr. Scranton that dying in this place might not even be the worst possible outcome. He paced and repeated facts to himself, hoping to ground himself in the moment and avoid the panic that could so easily set in. Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. Little by little, the words seemed to turn to nonsense in his mouth as the terror grew. Just as he felt like he was about to lose his mind, he noticed something. A small oasis in the endless darkness of SCP-3001. The glowing red light on the LSS control panel. Where had it come from? And how was it still recording? The doctor had no idea, but he was grateful for any kind of familiarity in this strange darkness around him. Perhaps the LSS could be the key to saving him, or at least figuring out what on earth was going on here. Whatever the case, there was no denying that having the panel here was better than nothing. At least, when it was found, if it was ever found, then people would know what had happened to him. As the days passed and he continued to mysteriously survive, Dr. Scranton deduced that one didn't need food or water to survive continually in SCP-3001. The location had an anomalous effect on its inhabitants. As the days passed and turned to weeks of wandering in the darkness, Dr. Scranton further deduced that he was no longer in his home dimension. This was an entirely separate pocket dimension, much like the one possessed by SCP-106, but featureless, a perfect self-contained void. Now dimly illuminated by the red light of the panel, Dr. Scranton explored further into the void around him. He traveled for months on end, the pain of his deficiencies growing by the day, but found he was getting nowhere. All things considered, he wasn't even sure he was moving, or whether reality and darkness were swirling around him like a thick liquid. Rather than walking on a single flat surface, he was moving in all directions across a three-dimensional plane. The space-time continuum appeared to be entirely broken here, where movement is more defined by the conscious intention to move than any real geographical repositioning. Dr. Scranton knew that this place broke every single one of Kijel's laws of reality parameters. And from his years working with a plethora of reality warpers in Site-120, he had a theory for why this pocket dimension was so strange. It had an extraordinarily weak Hume field. Before we get back to Dr. Scranton's semi-living nightmare, we need a quick primer on Hume theory and why having a weak Hume field is such a problem. A Hume is a unit of measurement for the strength and amount of reality in a given location or being. In an area with an incredibly low Hume field relative to our world, such as SCP-3001, universe breaches and anomalous incidents rise significantly. At the time of his being trapped there, SCP-3001 had the lowest number of Humes in any recorded environment, making it a phenomenally anomalous zone. It was for this reason that starvation and dehydration never took hold of him despite causing him great pain. And the worst by far was yet to come. Dr. Scranton wasn't trapped in this dimension for weeks or even months. He was trapped in the darkness for years, and it took a nightmarish toll on his body and mind. The small flashing red light on his LSS control panel became his only friend, and as the years drew on, he would hold entire conversations with his only source of illumination. He knew that his days were numbered. If he didn't escape the dimension within around 3 years, the Hume field would diffuse further, and he would be left in a truly horrific state. But based on how little headway he'd made in the time he'd been there, he didn't feel optimistic. He kept speaking into the recorder, if only to break the silence and prevent him from going completely insane. But even that would only hold it off for so long. Alone and talking to himself endlessly in the darkness, Dr. Scranton could feel his mind slipping as the confines of the pocket dimension constricted and his body began to change. The low Hume field slowly diffused his physical matter, destroying the physical integrity of his body, but never being merciful enough to actually let him die. In his haunting audio logs, the doctor described his hands as diffusing and thinning out like spiderwebs. Over time, there was less and less of him, and what was left wasn't entirely human. As Scranton's Hume level lowered to equalize with that of SCP-3001, the lines between his body and the LSS control console began to blur in a twisted marriage of warped flesh and machine. The Lang-Scranton stabilizer was anything but stable. Before his mind and body became something else entirely, the doctor still had the presence of mind to finally realize how he'd come to be in this terrible place. The LSS had opened a wormhole known as a Class C broken entry into a paradoxical pocket dimension between layers of reality and taken him through it. He'd slipped through a crack in reality into absolute darkness, and now he was stuck with a fate far worse than death. How do we know any of this? Much like the event in the first place, it's a total accident. Testing superior reality-bending technology almost 6 years after the disappearance caused the sudden return of the missing LSS to Site-120's reality labs. The only trace of Dr. Scranton that it brought back with it was the blood and viscera that coated the console, much to the abject horror of his still-grieving wife, Dr. Anna Lang. To this day, Dr. Scranton, formerly one of the Foundation's brightest minds, remains trapped in the nightmare of SCP-3001. His current condition, whether the Doctor is still alive after 20 years of being warped by the low Hume field of 3001's darkened confines, is still unknown. But for the Doctor's own sake, we hope he's been dead for quite some time, because few things on Earth are as horrifying as the alternative. Everyone has heard the stories about what happened back in '68, the most brutal series of occult murders in Wyoming history. 10 victims killed over a series of 4 months, found with their hearts cut out near some old cabin out in the sticks. All these innocent people's lives were cut short in the service of worshiping some entity that nobody else understood. Thankfully, the murders had stopped by the start of the 70s, and this humble Wyoming county knew nothing but peace for several years after. But the cabin where it all happened remained abandoned. The ground was sour there, weighed down by the horrors that transpired. You need to be brave or foolish to set foot there, all things considered. That's what led 17-year-old Charlie and his reluctant girlfriend Samantha to that rickety old building one cold, dark winter night. He was doing what most foolhardy teenage boys tried to do with almost every action they took: prove himself. Samantha was just along for the ride despite her protests. Her folks had always warned her about this place. The word they most often used to describe it was evil. But Charlie wouldn't take no for an answer. He was going to open that rickety front door and step inside. And Samantha would watch in awe of his bravery, though as he got closer and felt his fingers nearing the door handle, a pang of fear tingled through him. Was this really something he wanted to do? Too late to back out now. Samantha was watching. He couldn't be a coward. He needed to commit. He needed to prove he could do this. Charlie took a final deep breath, opened the door, and stepped through into the dark. He would never be seen again. Samantha squinted and looked into the dark. There was no into, really. It was like a giant black rectangle was obscuring the doorway. There was no way to make out any of the features inside. She called her boyfriend's name with a quivering voice and got nothing in response. That's when she should have started running. It might have even saved her. A figure emerged from the door, walking fast. It was solid black, with no discernible features, only a vaguely humanoid shape. It walked towards her with such speed and purpose that poor Samantha didn't even have time to scream. The creature extended a clawed hand and reached through her chest. It didn't even break the skin, just phased through her skin, muscle and bone, like a ghost passing through a wall. Suddenly, she felt immense pain as the creature drew back its hand. It was holding something that moved and squirmed in its clawed grip. It was only as Samantha collapsed, her vision going dark for the last time, that she realized she was looking at her own beating heart. And this wouldn't be where the horrors ended for this little Wyoming town. No, this was only the beginning. More people would go missing in the following days and weeks. Wildlife and livestock would also be found dead under mysterious circumstances. Local vets were baffled by dead pets found in yards with no obvious cause of death, only to be confused and horrified when they performed an autopsy and found massive internal bleeding and a missing heart, despite the fact that there was never any kind of wound indicating a heart's removal. Your average weird occult murders are the FBI's problem, but when hearts start to disappear in a mysterious fashion, that's how the SCP Foundation gets involved in your case. They dispatched a number of field agents into the town in order to track down the source of this anomalous activity and potentially secure and contain whatever hostile entity was behind it. In this case, they really didn't need to track the entity down. It came for them. 3 agents were driving down a lonely Wyoming road near the cabin when a sudden series of shapes glowed into prominence in the car's high beams. It wasn't just one of those Vantablack creatures. It was several. The second the car ground to a halt, the entities engaged with extreme hostility. They attacked, seemingly unaffected by conventional arms fire from the 2 agents in the front seats. They dragged them out of the car before reaching into their chests and pulling out their hearts. The agent in the back seat got lucky. He'd had experience with beings similar to this in the past, and had one method that might work. As they drew towards him, he loaded a magazine of silver-tipped rounds into his handgun. Closer, closer. The agent also happened to be a devout Muslim, and as the creatures approached, he drew his weapon and prayed to Allah for the strength to overcome these demons. He opened fire just as they were climbing into the car and reaching for him. For the first time, the bullets seemed to have an effect. The creatures squealed as the gunfire rendered through them. The ones dealt fatal wounds briefly convulsed before melting into a fine sulfuric sludge. The agent, thinking on his feet, noticed that the creatures that stole the hearts of his 2 fellow agents were fleeing. He followed them, trying to find their source. And of course, it was the cabin. The creatures passed back through the open door into the darkness of the cabin. How many of them were there? And what was going on inside? Naturally, the full might of the SCP Foundation rolled into town not long after this incident. Knowing now that the cabin, designated SCP-1983-1, was the source of the creatures, designated SCP-1983-2, things were easier to get under control. A fake chemical plant was built around the cabin as the pretense to keep it contained. This plant became known as Outpost 54. On-site researchers would sleep in the facility. Soldiers required for the regular culling of 1983-2 instances would make their home in the barracks. And of course, there was also a large armory filled with the specialized weaponry and ammunition required to put the rampaging, heart-stealing creatures down. The fateful encounter that the surviving agent had with these aggressive entities provided the Foundation with an invaluable piece of data on how to combat SCP-1983. For reasons not fully understood, the 1983-2 creatures have an extreme reaction against sincere human belief. It doesn't matter which religion you personally follow. If you are a true believer and you make a prayer to your deity of choice while firing on one of these monsters with silver-based ammunition, you will be able to slay them. Brings a whole new meaning to the phrase spray and pray. But the belief must be truly sincere for the attack to work. If there is doubt or skepticism in your heart when you're praying and firing, well, let's just say it won't be your heart for much longer. These very particular killing methods are the reason that MTF Chi-13, also known as the Choir Boys, were brought in to be the personal stewards of 1983's containment. They're a mobile task force formed entirely of devout religious believers, whose faith guards them against the influence of a number of occult monsters, SCP-1983 included. The Foundation performed a series of cursory tests on the cabin itself. The building contained several frustrating spatial anomalies, with the locus of these being the front door and the living room behind it. The living room seemed impossible to access by any means other than the anomalous aperture in the front door. Any attempts to enter it via the wall or other doors in the house simply caused the researchers to pop up in different areas of the house. After a barrage of tests, including busting holes in the exterior walls in an attempt to enter, to no avail of course, the O5 Council forbade further testing. It simply wasn't worth potentially creating more openings that 1983-2 instances could emerge from. This left only one option: launching excursions into the heart of the anomaly itself via the portal in the front door. This seemed to be the only way to successfully gather intel about the inner workings. For the first of 3 fateful incidents, a detachment from the choir boys armed with silver munitions were sent into the portal. None of them ever returned. But for the first time in years, the front door mysteriously closed again. This led to a drastic reduction in the release of SCP-1983-2 instances, but still left a whole team potentially stranded inside. A second detachment from the choir boys was prepared to head in and, if not rescue, at least find out what happened to the first. They opened the door and ventured inside, only for history to repeat itself. Not one of them would ever be seen alive again. And what's more, with the door once again open, another one of the entities soon charged out and began attacking more Foundation researchers. The onslaught stopped only with the brave sacrifice of Agent Morris, a field agent stationed at Outpost 54 at the time. He entered the doorway and closed the door once again from the inside. Just like everyone else, Agent Morris was sadly never seen alive again. But on May 23, 1989, something remarkable happened. Having wasted too many agents on this anomaly already, the Foundation decided to send in a D-Class. The D-Class in question was Jackson Parker, a man whose personnel file indicated that he had a profound belief in the moral fairness of the universe, that everything that happened simply must have happened for a reason, even his own incarceration. He was given a camera with a live feed and a lifeline leading back outside before practically being pushed into the cabin. Moments later, the lifeline was pulled taut and snapped. The feed cut off at around the same time. Foundation researchers at the outpost sighed, having lost another guinea pig. Little did they know, Jackson Parker wasn't dead. And what's more, he was about to do what no agent of the SCP Foundation could: destroy SCP-1983. On the inside, Jackson was met with a nightmare. This anomaly was so much worse than anyone knew. It didn't look like the inside of a cabin. It was a surreal shadow dimension looking like a patchwork amalgamation of so many different buildings. Hospitals, schools, offices, homes, factories, military installations. Jackson even recognized the dingy basement of his childhood home among the chaos. At that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just one anomalous location. It was the nexus point for many. How many doors were there out there? In how many different buildings, unleashing the horrors of SCP-1983 across the world? Across dimensions, even. Lucky for Jackson, he was about to receive a little help from beyond the grave. One of the choir boys, Agent Barclay, had written a note before he died. Here he gave the few pieces of information Jackson needed not only to survive, but potentially even destroy this thing once and for all. First, that the entities born from the shadows are weaker in the dark. Light gives them form. In the dark, they're intangible. Second, there is no way out through the front door. If someone tries to escape outside, their body will melt almost instantaneously. And most importantly of all, Agent Barclay realized why they'd been taking the hearts. In the center of this terrible place lies the nest, a giant pile of human hearts surrounded by light sources, acting as a kind of incubator. After being placed in the nest, the hearts burst open and new instances of SCP-1983-2 emerge. If someone could destroy the nest, it may destroy the very heart of SCP-1983 and finally neutralize this nightmarish anomaly. Agent Barclay had lost his faith seeing his friends slaughtered around him, so he didn't have it in himself to finish this thing. It could only be Jackson now. And as you know, Jackson had an unshakable belief that everything happens for a reason. Perhaps the reason he was here was to finally bring an end to the suffering, and that's exactly what he was going to do. Jackson shouldered Barclay's rifle and charged through the labyrinth, gunning down attacking SCP-1983-2 entities on the way. He was a man on a mission. Soon he made his way into the central chamber and finally saw it. The nest. This horrifying pile of wriggling human hearts. One of the many sights that finally broke Agent Barclay. But Jackson stood unbroken. He aimed the rifle at the nest and opened fire, the sheer force of his unshakable belief supercharging his every shot. He had struck a killing blow at the heart of the beast, avenging everyone it had ever murdered. On the outside, to everyone's amazement, SCP-1983 disappeared. The front door opened and the darkness dissipated within. When agents and researchers entered, they found the desiccated corpse of several mobile task force members, but all signs of the previous anomaly were gone. From the same note left on the corpse of Agent Barclay, it was clear to researchers that Jackson Parker had taken the advice and finally neutralized this dangerous Keter-class anomaly. Though Jackson himself was nowhere to be found, he was given a posthumous Medal of Bravery and Merit by the Foundation, only one of 2 ever awarded to a D-class. I guess you could say that everything happens for a reason. Even by the standards of other famous violent anomalies, SCP-106, better known as the Old Man, is a complete monster. Consider this. SCP-096, the Shy Guy, is a mindless beast that kills out of pure instinct when people see its face. SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, kills by accident with his deadly touch while trying to help. Even SCP-682 seems to kill because the burning hatred for all life that resides inside it is impossible to suppress. But SCP-106 doesn't kill out of hatred, he kills out of love. And what he loves more than anything else is inflicting pain, misery, and terror just for the fun of it. In case you haven't seen our video on the subject, SCP-106 is an invincible, sadistic old man whose anomalous abilities allow him to walk through solid surfaces. As a result, he's incredibly hard to contain, making him one of the scarier Keter-class anomalies in SCP Foundation containment. And it's almost impossible to escape if you end up on his hit list. But his scariest ability of all is dragging people into his pocket dimension, a private hell where he controls both space and time, and can do awful things to his captured victims to his heart's content. SCP-106 is downright evil, and he couldn't be happier about it. You might assume that there are no hidden depths to be plumbed when it comes to the straightforwardly violent monster, but certain SCP Foundation discoveries about the infamous Old Man may surprise you. Meet SCP-978, the Desire Camera. This anomalous Polaroid camera has the remarkable ability to reveal the deepest desire of its subject, and the Foundation tested the camera on several employees and anomalies, including SCP-106. Now, you might have expected SCP-106's greatest desire to be causing more pain, his favorite activity, but the researchers were shocked to find out that wasn't the case at all. The actual result, according to test logs, was, quote, SCP-106 roaming a wheat field, appears to be approaching an old farmhouse, while a woman appearing to be in her mid-60s welcomes 106. It turns out that even a creature of pure malice like SCP-106 may have some hidden secrets after all, a prospect that greatly intrigued Foundation researchers. While an obscene amount of work had gone into containing the Old Man and subverting his powerful anomalous abilities, comparatively little work had gone into his origins. And while the Foundation actually started digging, they were surprised to find that the rabbit hole was far, far deeper than they'd ever imagined. Much like the Joker, the Old Man's origin story is multiple choice. Out of the reams of research into SCP-106's origin, we've narrowed it down to the 3 most plausible possibilities for how a creature like the Old Man could come to exist: the divergent species theory, the Scranton theory, and the Corporal Lawrence theory. And today we're going to explore all of them. First though, let's look at the divergent species theory. The main basis for this theory is information gleaned from a tale known as Once But Not Now. This tale is seen as a collection of memories from the atrophied mind of the Old Man, detailing his origins thousands of years prior. It's worth remembering that a lot of these memories are, of course, highly subjective and interpretive. If they are to be taken as the authentic memories of the Old Man, then it is also important to note that, as a deranged, compulsive sadist, details of his memories are possibly unreliable. That being said, according to the reports contained within Once But Not Now, the Old Man was once a member of a hominoid family similar to that of humans, but displaying the anomalous powers we've come to expect from SCP-106. Enhanced strength, corrosive mucus, and the ability to pass through solid objects. In the documents, it is implied that the primary source of prey for the Old Man's species was actually Neanderthals. They had basic tribal cultures that allowed them to organize hunting parties for the purpose of bringing food back to their camps. They even had a semblance of socially enforced laws, leaving members of their tribe to starve after they committed murder against their own species. If things had played out differently, this species may have stuck around, perhaps even surpassing humanity and becoming the dominant species on Earth, an entire thriving culture of SCP-106. However, as time passed, the Neanderthals were eventually hounded to extinction. This destroyed the primary food source for SCP-106's species, which, if you even have a basic familiarity with evolutionary biology, never bodes well for a species. As the old man's species turned its attention to humanity, it found they weren't nearly as easy to prey upon. As a result, their species slowly fell into decline and eventually slipped into near extinction. The old man, most likely the last of his kind, went into a state of hibernation within a tree. He remained in the tree for what may have been thousands of years before eventually climbing out into a world that had long since forgotten anything like him had ever existed. The old man woke up into a strange new world, filled with alien structures and garish lights. He wandered, confused and hungry, haunted by the knowledge that he was the last one left of his kind. He wandered around the new world until he found what he described as a nest, likely just a normal human home. He became distressed by the structures and lights around him, until finally happening upon a food source that he hungrily ate. This food source turned out to be a human infant. Not long after that, he was apprehended by figures described as the men in white coats, who are likely to be agents of the SCP Foundation. He was contained not long after that. These days, his only motivating factor is the search for pain and anguish, the only things that can give this very, very old man any semblance of feelings anymore. Of course, this is actually the least popular of the three theories, but it does pose a rather disturbing question. If ever there was a whole species of SCP-106, is it really possible that our species would be able to outlast them? The second most popular theory was that SCP-106 was not only once human, but an extremely important Foundation researcher, namely Dr. Robert Scranton. If that name sounds familiar to you, it may be because you've heard of the famous Scranton reality anchors. These devices, inspired by Scranton, have been the Foundation's greatest tools in combating the anomalous effects of reality warpers. And if the Scranton theory about the origin of 106 is to be believed, it's darkly ironic that it would be a reality warping anomaly that would bring Dr. Scranton to his unfortunate end. The horrors began on January 2nd in the year 2000, when Dr. Scranton and his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, were testing a new technology, the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer. This was the technology that would lay the groundwork for the reality anchors that would later be created in Scranton's name. However, the stabilizer was ironically anything but stable, and caused what is known as a momentary Class C broken entry wormhole. Scranton was sucked into the wormhole and transported to a pocket dimension known as SCP-3001, or the Red Reality. Many people assumed Scranton was dead, but the reality was far more horrific. SCP-3001, which the still-living Scranton and the control pad of the stabilizer were sucked into, was a kind of empty, infinitely extending void. The laws of reality did not apply in the darkened void of 3001. There was no space, no light, no passage of time. It was the absence of all existence, except for Scranton, who was the one speck of existence trapped inside. As whatever passed for time went on, Scranton could only speak into a small audio recorder embedded in the console. It became his only company, the only thing anchoring him to some semblance of sanity. But of course, that couldn't last forever. As he came to terms with the reality of his situation, Dr. Scranton became overtaken by fear, and then despair. He started to lose hope that he would ever exit the pocket dimension of SCP-3001. And his coherent speech became terrified, disconnected ramblings as his mind fell apart. He tried to end his life 184 times while trapped there, but it never worked. He took the damage of each attempt, slowly becoming unrecognizable, but there was no death to grant him escape from SCP-3001. As time went on, the very state of reality within the Red Reality began to decay. Matter started to become antimatter, and Robert Scranton felt himself coming apart at the seams and floating into nothingness. He was still conscious and very much aware of his personality, perhaps even his very soul, fractured and drifted away with his body. In total, he spent almost 6 years inside the broken pocket dimension, though this probably felt like an eternity to him. Eventually, even the console vanished from the Red Reality and returned back to our own, leaving whatever was left of Robert Scranton truly alone. Those who loved him prefer to believe that he's now as close to dead as possible with an SCP-3001. But people who believe in the Scranton theory have different ideas. Dr. Robert Scranton, or rather whatever he became, was headstrong. He wanted to escape the Red Reality at any cost so he could be reunited with his wife, Dr. Anna Lang. Through sheer force of willpower, Dr. Scranton pulled his disparate matter back together, but it didn't come back in the way it used to be. There was something wrong, terribly wrong. He was now something less than human, SCP-106. Scranton, a man who'd spent his life developing technology to keep reality consistent, was about to build his own reality. He would build, destroy, and rebuild again and again. He would create a perfect reality for him and his beloved Anna, which would later become his trademark pocket dimension. But when Anna saw the monster he'd become, she was horrified by him. His very touch destroyed her, his corrosive mucus melting her away. All was left was the monster he'd become, the old man, SCP-106. Of course, there's one more theory about the origin of SCP-106. If you've ever heard the wall-walking monster referred to as Uncle Larry, this next story is why. In fact, it's the most widely believed of all the SCP-106 origin theories, the Corporal Lawrence theory. So who is Corporal Lawrence? We actually know very little about the man, aside from the fact he was a military officer during World War I. Our knowledge of him comes from first-hand accounts of the soldiers serving under him in the trenches. The corporal was described as a plain, aloof, and vacant man, with a tendency to stare. Many of the soldiers disliked him on account of his incredibly flat personality, but perhaps even more so, because Lawrence always seemed to be followed around by the smell of rot. Strange incidents also seemed to follow him around, like soldiers in his barracks seeing greater numbers of sicknesses like trench foot. It was almost as if he was cursed, and perhaps he was. One fateful day, Lawrence and his men needed to raid an enemy trench. They infiltrated the trench and found that everyone there was dead and covered in a corrosive black slime. Worse still, Corporal Lawrence discovered a strange black hole in the trench filled with the same black substance. He then collapsed into this hole before climbing out, clearly shaken by the experience. After that, everything went downhill. Corporal Lawrence appeared to completely change his personality, becoming a perpetually grinning eccentric with a head full of strangely morbid and sadistic thoughts. At a certain point, his body seemed to reproduce the same corrosive mucus he fell into, causing pain and sickness to his fellow soldiers wherever he went. In the end, after the horrific deaths of some of the soldiers working under him, Corporal Lawrence and his men were apprehended and interred at a military hospital. Not long after, though, he disappeared along with the rest of his men. The only trace that remained was on the former Corporal Lawrence's hospital bed, traces of the corrosive black mucus and a ring of human teeth, pulled from the heads of every single person on the ward. The next time he was seen, Corporal Lawrence truly was no more. Only SCP-106 remained, and in his own sick little way, he'd never been happier. And there you have it, the 3 most popular theories into the origin of SCP-106. Which, if any, do you think is the most likely theory, or do you have one of your own? Let us know down in the comments. And remember, keep an eye on the walls. You never know when the old man will drop in for a visit. As we grow up and get older, our bodies begin to change. Sometimes those changes can be a bit uncomfortable or even bizarre. We feel strange pains in new places. We grow seemingly a foot in height overnight. Hair sprouts up in new places and falls out of other places. Whether it's puberty or just the aging process, it seems like the human body never runs out of ways to surprise us. But those surprises are completely normal and to be expected as part of being alive. Unless you're one particular young man whose body changed overnight into something unrecognizable and entirely anomalous. That's when a very special individual we'll be calling Matt Terra comes in. Matt was an ordinary 24-year-old man, with nothing particularly interesting about him. Sure, he was a nice guy, he was smart, he was great at chess and video games, and had an impressive memory for science trivia. But there was nothing unusual about him. Every day he would get up, go to work at a board game and comic book store. chat with his coworkers and make a few sales, head home, make dinner, relax, and go to bed ready to do it all again the next day. It wasn't a glamorous life or that exciting, but it was a pleasant life, and he was happy to live it. One night, Matt was having a difficult time sleeping. He was tossing and turning, waking up every few minutes to a dull, aching feeling in his stomach. He didn't feel feverish or sick, and the pain wasn't sharp or indicative of an emergency, so he shrugged it off as indigestion and tried to get back to sleep. We've all been there, right? Eventually, he nodded off all the way. He woke up the next morning blurry-eyed and exhausted from the rough night, but feeling otherwise fine. He climbed out of bed, stretched, and headed to the bathroom to brush his teeth. There in the mirror, he saw something that made him think he might still be dreaming. He pinched himself and found that he was indeed awake. While he was sleeping, somehow his body had changed into something completely impossible. Where his stomach had once been, there was a blue, green, and brown orb that reminded him of a photograph he had once seen, a picture of Earth taken aboard the International Space Station. After calling into work and explaining in a stammering voice that he would not be coming in that day, Matt did the only thing he could think of. He went to the hospital. Of course, the doctors had no idea what to do with him. It wasn't like they could just take out his appendix or give him an antibiotic. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. Fortunately for him, one doctor knew a lot more than he was letting on. Matt wouldn't be the first human to develop bizarre anomalous traits and then stagger into a nearby hospital for treatment. That's why the SCP Foundation has agents embedded in major hospitals all across the world. And one such doctor was the man treating Matt. On the downside, he wouldn't be enjoying his freedom much longer. On the upside, it'd cost a hell of a lot less than a regular uninsured hospital visit. So the field agent called up his superiors, wiped Matt's record from the hospital, and soon after, a group of Foundation agents came to collect the confused, unfortunate host of what soon would be known as SCP-007. SCP-007 is found within an abdominal cavity on the body of Matt, also referred to as the subject, just below his ribcage where his stomach would be. Most of his abdomen is completely missing, including the muscles, skin, and organs that should ordinarily be necessary for his survival. However, he does not appear to experience any pain or even discomfort from his condition. SCP-007 itself is a spherical planet, composed of soil and water, none of which actually touches any part of his body. The planet resembles a miniature duplicate of Earth, about 60 centimeters in diameter, with its own weather patterns and gravitational pull, neither of which appear to have any effect on the subject, nor do they seem to be affected by his movements or behavior. There are also a variety of tiny organisms dwelling on the planet's surface that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Though it greatly resembles Earth, there are some notable differences. Obviously, instead of floating in space and revolving around the sun, this planet does not appear to have an orbit. It is uncertain where the organisms on the planet get their light from, though it does not seem to be our sun, since the organisms have not shown any negative effects from the lack of sunlight and presence of artificial light in the Foundation's site. There are continents visible on the planet's surface, surrounded by its sea, but they do not resemble a continental alignment that can be traced to any point in our Earth's history. As far for the life on the small planet, the organisms navigating the surface of the world inside Matt's abdomen, there are dozens of identifiable species that bear a passing resemblance to creatures on Earth. There are blue cow-like livestock, species of bird that appear to have scales, red and orange trees, and other plant life, and two intelligent species that are notably and significantly humanoid in appearance and behavior. Observation of these intelligent species via microscope and digital imaging has revealed that they operate in societies and are consistently developing and improving their technology. Though their technology was incredibly rudimentary when Matt was first brought into containment, resembling early nomadic human civilizations, it has progressed to the level of 15th century humanity. The research team assigned to SCP-007 has noticed the recent introduction of a version of the printing press, used to produce what appear to be pamphlets and even entire books. The language these books are printed in is unrecognizable, and so the contents of these materials are currently unknown. But the citizens of the planet clearly have a grasp of the written word, and both the technology and the desire to share it amongst themselves. They have also developed an agricultural system. Their farms have progressed to the point of using new innovations such as windmills, used to mill grain, wheelbarrows used to transport crops and other supplies, and the practice of crop rotation. Unfortunately, with these positive developments comes the ability to escalate conflicts and wage wars. They look to have created parachutes, gunpowder, and other explosives, and their own versions of the muzzle-loaded rifle. However, in spite of the ugliness of battle, there is beauty too. The people of the planet have created new ways to express themselves, with what can only be described as new instruments closely resembling the piano, the mandolin, and the bagpipes. As exciting and even moving as it can be to watch these tiny beings grow and change, building their own miniature society, it is also a bit troubling. As these people continue to progress at such a fast rate, it stands to reason that they will eventually catch up to us, or even surpass us in terms of technology. The research team has not yet made any attempts to communicate with the inhabitants of the Abdominal planet, concerned about influencing the developments of its societies in any way, or compromising their ability to observe them without interfering, but they may not be able to keep this up for much longer. What will happen if these tiny beings continue to follow in our footsteps and create their very own space programs? If they leave their planet's atmosphere, they will discover the truth, that their world is buried in the abdomen of what is, to them, a giant man. That reality would be enough to shatter the sanity of many of us, and it would likely cause chaos on their world. There has been a great deal of debate amongst the research team about what to do if this should happen. Some insist that the team should continue to passively observe until the issue comes up, while others believe that they should attempt to make contact with the inhabitants of the planet in order to soften the eventual blow to their perceptions when they attempt space exploration. Currently, the debate rages on, as the research team keeps an eye on the progression of the little civilizations. Hopefully, if they do eventually make contact, they will find a way to make it clear that we come in peace. So, who is Matt Terra, the subject? He is a highly intelligent young man with a shockingly casual attitude towards his body's anomalous properties. When asked about the planet, he simply says, "I just woke up one day and there it was. I don't have any idea how it got there." Testing revealed that he is genetically human, and there is nothing unusual or even notable about the rest of his body. He provided his name willingly upon arriving at the SCP Foundation, but no one of his name and age has ever lived in his hometown area according to public records. To verify his identity, he was able to produce a social security card and a driver's license, which did not appear to be forged or altered in any way. However, when the numbers were run through the system, there was no match. Officially, this man does not exist. It is not entirely certain where he came from or why there is no record of him, but one researcher posited that he somehow crossed over from a parallel dimension, or that the presence of his abdominal planet added as a kind of cognitohazardous effect to him that erased all perception of him from any records. Whatever the case may be, wherever he came from, he is here now. Because he has not yet attempted escape or even shown a desire to leave the Foundation's site, there are no strict containment procedures in place. The only active containment procedures for SCP-007 are for the subject's safety and security. He lives in a sealed room with furniture and other items, which are granted upon request as long as they do not pose a security risk. The subject's room includes an easy chair, a bed, a beanbag chair, a television with access to several movie and television streaming services, a number of video game consoles, an espresso machine, a microwave, a refrigerator, an exercise bike, and a bookshelf filled with books and graphic novels. Though he does not appear to require food or water in order to survive, he enjoys consuming both food and drinks, and is especially fond of coffee, sodas, grape juice, sour cream and onion potato chips, mangoes, and the occasional treat of Chinese takeout, an opinion which he shares with the eccentric Dr. Clef. The head researcher assigned to SCP-007, Dr. Cho, has a weekly game of chess with Matt, during which he evaluates the subject's mental health and general emotional well-being. Over the course of these games, the two have developed a friendly relationship, with each man winning about half of the time. Matt asks about Dr. Cho's family, and in return, Dr. Cho checks in about his containment situation, seeing if there's anything the Foundation can provide to make his time with them more comfortable. Most recently, Matt requested a computer with an internet connection, mainly so that he could play his video games in online co-op mode, but this request was denied out of a concern that it would compromise Foundation security. Sympathetic to his desire for company, Dr. Cho has begun to allow the subject to have visits with SCP-507, who will stop by his containment facility during his inactive periods for a movie night or some video games. Matt has described 507 as his best friend, aside from Dr. Cho. In spite of the intricate world inexplicably floating in his body, the subject leads a relatively simple life. He does not seem to be restless or resentful at all. In fact, he seems largely content, though his future is uncertain and he is living through a completely unprecedented anomalous experience. He is probably one of the happiest anomalies contained at the SCP Foundation, and definitely one of the most at peace with his anomalous status. Whatever happens next for him, he will probably be ready for it with a smile, and there's something we can all learn from that. Is there any greater computer on planet Earth than the human brain? That web of almost 200 billion neurons inside your skull gives you the equivalent memory space of over 1,000 1-terabyte hard drives. Sure, the human brain might not be able to process information at the speed of the average computer, but it can regulate the movement and functions of your entire body, all while using less energy than a light bulb. That's right. Our brains are pretty impressive organic computers, but there is some stiff competition. Well, not completely stiff. You'll see. Say hello to SCP-003, also referred to as the Biological Motherboard. Hearing that name, you would be right to assume that SCP-003 is a computer formed of organic components, as opposed to man-made microchips and circuit boards. But there is a little bit more to it than that. SCP-003 is actually composed of two distinct parts, referred to as SCP-003-1 and SCP-003-2, both related, but each with a separate origin. The former, 003-1, is the machine's motherboard, whereas your ordinary home computer or laptop might have a motherboard made out of fiberglass and copper. This one is far less conventional. So what is 003-1 actually made from? The answer is living tissue. Everything from hair and fingernails to chitin, which is a substance found in the exoskeletons of some invertebrate animals. All of these components, parts that may have once belonged to a living thing, are arranged in a configuration much like that of a computer's motherboard. It sounds like something plucked out of a film by John Carpenter or David Cronenberg, doesn't it? But how or why would someone ever construct something like this? Well, the answer to that isn't clear. So far, the only answers we have come from the SCP Foundation's extensive testing of the biological motherboard. According to researchers, SCP-003-1 predates even the very earliest modern circuits by several thousands of years, meaning that whoever built it was certainly ahead of their time. Also, the motherboard is alive. Wait, did we forget to mention that? SCP-003-1 has displayed at least a low level of sentience during testing by the Foundation, not enough to be considered an active threat unless certain conditions make it dangerous. The second component of SCP-003 is 003-2, a stone tablet that 003-1 was attached to when it was first discovered. The surface of 003-2 has a number of runes carved into it, but these symbols don't match letters or characters from any known language. The runes on 003-2 are also known to regularly emit a pale, flickering pattern of light. Now, you're probably asking, how is a slab of stone able to light itself up? Well, that is because SCP-003-2 has an internal computer controlling it, and not one composed of organic parts like hair and fingernails. Somewhere within the stone is a non-biological computer, fueled by some unknown anomalous power source. The Foundation's researchers can't access the internal components of SCP-003-2 without running the high risk of damaging it. But as far as they can tell, whatever is running this bizarre machine has been slowly losing power for centuries. The biological motherboard is also known to emit measurable levels of heat, light, and radiations of an anomalous nature. So why would someone go to the trouble of creating a computer out of living parts and anomalous stone? And what is the purpose of the biological motherboard? The SCP Foundation considers it highly probable that the stone slab of 003-2 was actually created with the intention of keeping the motherboard component, 003-1, contained. Additionally, during testing, Foundation researchers have been able to extract partially complete data from SCP-003. This data seems to refer to some sort of potential catastrophe, either in the future or one that has already occurred. As a direct result of SCP-003-1, it would seem that 003-1 and 003-2 must stay combined in order to prevent what the Foundation would deem an LK-class restructuring event. How could the biological motherboard cause an event like this? It just sounds like a partially alive flesh circuit on a stone slab. It's when the temperature around SCP-003 drops below 35 degrees Celsius that things start to get really strange. From the minute they detect a decrease in temperature, both components of SCP-003 begin to react. The biological motherboard itself starts to grow, rapidly increasing its overall size. 003-1 fuels this growth state by absorbing any nearby matter, adding anything close enough to its fleshy mass. First, it will assimilate any inorganic material, everything from particles in the atmosphere on up. 003-1 transforms these new additions to itself into the same organic matter that makes up the biological motherboard, transforming metal or plastic into dead skin cells, hair, chitin, enamel, keratin, and other similar materials. This growth state increases until SCP-003 takes on a form in the shape of an ophiuroid, also known as a brittle star, an aquatic life form similar to a starfish, with 5 long, thin appendages protruding from a central body. In the case of SCP-003, this body appears to be the computer's central processing unit. In this new form, the biological motherboard will also begin to create sensory organs that will survey the area around it for more materials to assimilate. Only 003-2, the stone slab, is immune to being converted into biological matter. Next, the second phase of transformation occurs, and SCP-003-1 begins to absorb organic matter into its mass as well, living or otherwise. If you've ever seen The Blob, then you know what this looks like, and how horrifying it would be for any person unfortunate enough to be standing too close. During this stage, SCP-003 will attempt to copy the biology of a living organism it comes into contact with, and uses this template to try and lure others towards it. However, the biological motherboard appears to use a lot of processing power to analyze and assimilate organic matter, and this can actually diminish the speed at which it increases in size. So what happens to 003-2, the stone component of SCP-003, during all of this? When the biological motherboard is growing and changing form, melding with other organisms as its fleshy mass increases, does 003-2 power its transformation? No. In fact, it tries to prevent it. That's right. The two components of SCP-003 do not work in tandem. They work against each other. As the biological motherboard starts to grow, the stone slab attached to it will emit concentrated bursts of radiation. These radioactive emissions have a counter effect on 003-1's ability to assimilate matter and increase its size, stopping the organic mass of flesh from growing and even reversing the process when the temperature is raised to over 100 degrees Celsius. What we have so far is a machine in 2 parts, one that grows and assimilates matter at lower temperatures, and the other that releases radiation to stop this happening. Naturally, the SCP Foundation counteracts the anomalous growing ability of 003-1 by keeping the biological motherboard in a heated containment environment, still attached to 003-2. Under no circumstances is the temperature of SCP-003's containment unit to drop below 35 degrees Celsius, and normally no living person is permitted to make any direct contact with the machine. However, in the event of an emergency resulting in a loss of power, Foundation staff are required to huddle skin to skin with the fleshy mass of the motherboard, in an attempt to keep it warm through their own body heat, much like how penguins huddle together for warmth. Of course, those unlucky members of personnel probably hope they can generate enough heat between them to keep 003-1 from starting to grow. Otherwise, they'll know they'll be the first that the biological motherboard will absorb. Should a member of personnel be chosen for this particularly unpleasant task of being on hand to keep 003 warm, then they will be made to submit for a full examination beforehand. No one can be allowed close to SCP-003 if they're carrying any bodily parasites like tapeworms or head lice. They would all be extra organisms for 003-1 to absorb. Foundation staff are also required to be decontaminated both before and after directly dealing with SCP-003. And of course, no member of the SCP Foundation is permitted to ever detach the biological motherboard from the stone component. Given that 003-2 is the only device capable of reducing and reversing SCP-003-1's growth, any changes in the pattern or color of its glowing ruins is to be reported to high-ranking members of the Foundation. There have been multiple incidents involving SCP-003 though, usually occurring when staff working in the Foundation's M03 Gloria research team attempt to push the boundaries of the device's anomalous properties. Their interest in the biological motherboard lies purely in seeing how the machine evolves when allowed to grow beyond its second brittle star stage. During one such incident, 003-1 was allowed to grow and restructure for just over 9 minutes, after which the containment area's temperature was lowered, and 003-2 released a massive continuous spike in radiation. Any of the new material that had been bonded to the biological motherboard dissolved, falling away and turning into a dusty residue which was then collected for testing. At this point, both 003-1 and 003-2 seemed to power down, with no detectable activity. The stone slab did not power back on until it was connected to an external power generator. When the same procedure was repeated and 003-1 re-entered its growth state, 003-2's radiation appeared to be unable to stop the motherboard from increasing in mass. When it reached 4 times its original size by assimilating any and all matter it could reach, SCP-003 then began to change form in a way that had never been observed before, forming a protective shell around 003-1. The entire living machine breached containment into the observation area, grabbing M03 Gloria researchers and its appendages. Using these M03 Gloria members, it began adding to itself and forming a new body. As it assimilated the researchers, the biological motherboard rearranged its center mass. SCP-003 then took on the form of a 3-meter-tall female humanoid, with tentacles protruding from its newly formed hair and spine. Next, the part creature, part machine began to make indecipherable sounds, trying to communicate with researchers through these rudimentary vocalizations. Somehow, perhaps through information it had absorbed from the researchers in its grasp, SCP-003 wanted to speak. What happened next? An agent, sent on orders direct from the O5 Council, was dispatched to the containment area. According to Foundation records, the agent attempted to engage in conversation with SCP-003's new form, but any data about their exchange has been expunged. Luckily, this agent was able to restore power to SCP-003's stone component, returning the room temperature to the proper containment levels, which caused 003-1 to return to its normal state. The threat recontained, all 9 members of M03 Gloria were found to be unharmed, suffering no side effects from assimilation, other than a few cases of psychological trauma. One of them, Dr. Tilda Moose, the leader of M03 Gloria, was later interviewed by the Foundation. She claimed that SCP-003 had tried to talk to the researchers, connecting with them mentally in a crude, broken language that they couldn't understand. She ripped 3 of the researchers apart and put them back together unharmed. She doesn't understand human emotion or pain, or very much about how we experience the world. Yes, I would say the containment procedures are necessary. According to Dr. Moose, SCP-003 is some unknown alien entity, one without a clear understanding of humanity. It cannot understand pain or physical sensation, yet it is bent on remaking the world into a paradise. The whole effect felt like words of some kind. I believe she wanted to see what we could understand, so she could understand us. Dr. Moose said in her interview, "She didn't have time to finish analyzing us. I don't know what would have happened if she had." There's a quote that says, The beautiful thing about learning is nobody can take it away from you. But what good is learning if the knowledge might hurt you, drive you mad, or even kill you? It just sits there in your mind, like a stick of dynamite with an invisible fuse. It could blow at any moment. All it takes is a careless slip of the tongue, and you might turn into a talking home appliance. This is a conundrum faced by anyone dealing with an Infohazard, a certain kind of anomaly often dealt with by the SCP Foundation. Before we get into some of the craziest examples of Infohazards and what they've done to people, because let's face it, that's what you're really here for. First, we have to answer that big question everyone's a little afraid to ask. Just what is an Infohazard? And how does it differ from a far more common type of SCP, the dreaded cognitohazard? Well, we're glad you're finally brave enough to ask. First, cognitohazards are anomalies that are dangerous to perceive through one of the senses. A well-known example is SCP-096, which is actually a visual cognitohazard. You see its face and you're toast. It's as simple as that. And cognitohazards exist for all of the other senses too: hearing, taste, touch, even smell. Infohazards, on the other hand, are different. These anomalous effects are triggered when you start trying to express or describe something about what you've perceived. And when you do, things start to get really weird, really fast. Maybe you're trying to explain what you just saw to family members, friends, or the police. Maybe you're a member of SCP Foundation staff trying to write up a report or a new experiment log. Or maybe you're a YouTube channel trying to create entertaining yet informative breakdowns and explanations of anomalies from the SCP Foundation. If any or all of these apply to you, then Infohazards are going to be your worst enemy. But as we look at some of the strangest examples, we'll try our best to resist their effects. First, seeing as it's so hot out, how about we take a relaxing dip in the pool while we tell you all about SCP-1128. What is SCP-1128? Well, that's a loaded question. Technically speaking, it's a massive predatory aquatic creature, but despite its huge size, the creature can hunt its prey in any body of water. Whether you're stepping in a puddle, relaxing in the bath, or say chilling out in the pool, SCP-1128 can track you down and potentially eat you alive. In one particularly horrifying test, a D-Class was drinking from a simple glass of water when the aquatic predator emerged, yanked them inside, and ate them. Okay, so maybe you're feeling a little nervous now, but don't worry, you're still safe. Some people have even survived their attacks from SCP-1128. Well, their initial attacks anyway. The creature has a tendency to come back again and again, relentless in its ravenous hunger for human flesh. Whenever it attacks successfully, all that's left is some blood floating on the water. But again, please don't worry too much about this creature. We don't have another 682 on our hands. After all, it's an Infohazard. It can only start hunting you if you receive a written or verbal description of the creature. Oh, or some kind of visual representation of the creature too. Actually, on second thought, you might want to get out of the pool now. And put down that drink too. Instead, let us tell you a nice little story. You step into a bar, smelling of fine liquor and rich mahogany. You even get a whiff of some fine leather-bound book. You see us sitting at the bar, motioning for you to come over, and you decide to approach. You're intrigued by our winning smile and our vast knowledge of anomalies and SCP Foundation lore. You take a seat next to us and order a drink. Get something fancy. It's on our tab after all. Our treat. What does this have to do with Infohazards, you ask? That's the thing about SCP-1893, kid. We say, our dulcet tones smoother than scotch. You can never just talk about it. It's an Infohazard that forces information about it to be delivered like a story. That's why we're in this bar right now. That's the setup. It expresses actual information about itself through the dialogue, see? You nod, beginning to grasp the concept as the bartender serves you your drink. It's been forever since you've been to a bar. Feels good to be out again, honestly. You drink deeply, savoring the flavor, but you almost choke when you see the man standing in the corner. He's so large and so distinctive. It surprises you that you hadn't noticed him before now. He stands in the corner, a freakishly tall and muscular guy, like a basketball player who decided to become a pro bodybuilder. His muscular arms are bulging out of his white vest, and a pair of bull's horns are tattooed across the top of his bald head, making him look like the devil made flesh. He stares at you with a subdued kind of annoyance, as if to say that you're not in real danger quite yet, but if he wanted, he could grab you and twist your head off like a bottle cap. What's with the huge guy, you ask us, more than a little concern in your voice? Oh, him? We reply with a smirk. He comes with the anomaly. He appears in every SCP-1893 experience to an extent, though his level of involvement varies. If SCP-1893 doesn't perceive you as an annoyance or a threat, then you're good to go. But if 1893 starts to feel like you're gonna cause it some problems, then the guy with the horn tattoos is gonna intervene. Speaking of which, you look up and you see that the giant man is now standing next to you, brow furrowed in visible rage. He picks up your drink and crushes the glass in his hand without flinching, dripping booze and blood onto the counter. He snarls, "I think you've had enough, buddy. Now it's time for you to leave, or we're gonna have to get physical. Capiche?" You don't need to be told twice. You grab your hat, get up and leave the bar, abandoning us on our lonely stool. But our next Infohazard still awaits. You like poetry? Japanese poetry, yes? The humble haiku. It's Dear 931, a unique Infohazard. It's so poetic. Though specifically it takes the form of haiku. So what does that mean? A rigid structure. The first line 5 syllables, then 7, then 5. We can't talk about this in ways other than haiku. It is challenging. Object class is safe. It is kept at Site 19. Need 3rd tier clearance. So what is this thing? SCP-931. It is a rice bowl, white with a blue band and a cracked blue pattern, all inside the bowl. And we must confess, we took that one from the file. Man, haikus are hard. 3 inches in height, 4.5 inches across. Metric doesn't fit. No maker's marks found. Suspected to have been made late 1900s. Really makes you think on the skill of these poets. Sans anomalies. Sure, it can't kill you, but writing these drives you mad. Curse 931. Trapped in this rhythm scheme makes the old man's torture world look like a resort. Okay, let's move on. Other SCPs to see. We're sick of haiku. Okay, back to normal. Time to shake off the structures of SCP-931 and talk about another iconic Infohazard, SCP-3007. This incurable Infohazard is a lot less whimsical than a rice bowl that forces you to write and speak in haiku. In fact, it's literally killed 7 people, and some in surprisingly gruesome ways. The main component of the Infohazard is known as SCP-3007-1. This is an extremely vivid anomalous hallucination that affects those under the 3007 umbrella, known as SCP-3007-2. To be afflicted with SCP-3007 is a truly horrifying and debilitating condition. The hallucinations occur at an average of 4 times a day, with each episode lasting for as long as an hour. And during these episodes, the victims are at risk of grievous bodily harm, or even death. So the question now is, what exactly is the SCP-3007-1 hallucination? To the people experiencing it, they appear to be transported to a strange alien world consisting of a huge number of white towers or pillars stretching into the sky. SCP-3007-2 specimens are trapped on a series of bridges, incredibly far off the ground, that connect these various structures. This anomalous area is known as SCP-3007-3. It is important to remember that people transported to this world still remain, physically in our own. However, any damage sustained with SCP-3007-3 will carry over into our own reality. To give one particularly gruesome example, some people fall from the precarious bridges and tumble to their deaths in SCP-3007-3. Back in our reality, they suddenly explode from the damage of an invisible high-speed impact, killing them instantly. There's much more to SCP-3007, enough that it probably warrants its own explanation, and the SCP Foundation takes it extremely seriously, believing that if the Infohazard is allowed to breach containment and become contagious, it could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. As a result, Anyone found to be infected by SCP-3007 is contained and summarily terminated to reduce the risk of its spreading. To make things even worse, there are also concerns about SCP-3007-3 seeping into our reality, as those standing within a 2-meter range of SCP-3007-2 during a 3007-1 episode can actually hear the sounds from the terrifying hallucinatory reality. Okay, that was a little scary. How about instead of falling to your death without falling at all, we talk about a nice movie. Gonershrav by Martin Scorsese, one of the best gangster movies of all time. Wait, you've never heard of Gonershrav? It's got everything. Action, suspense, romance, a mountain of black thorns on which lives a dark tyrant of terrible and unknowable power. You sure you've never seen Gonershrav? Well, here's the thing. All signs point to movies like Gonershrav's and many others simply not existing. This comes as a result of SCP-2747, an infohazardous phenomenon that causes people to talk about works of fiction that don't exist. These works often feature commonalities, like an ethereal or disturbing tone, ambiguity, black thorns, and a sinister, mysterious antagonist. The Foundation is doing all they can to hunt down and suppress SCP-2747, but it's proving more difficult than they'd imagined. Currently, the leading hypothesis is that these tales may have actually existed once, but were erased from reality, leaving only the residue of memory and the odd scrap of evidence around. Many researchers speculate that the various pieces that form SCP-2747 are anafabula, pieces of fiction accidentally composed with the perfect elements to cause them to quite literally erase themselves over time. Now, the greatest concern that the Foundation has about these anafabulas is that they might actually be one, and their reality is on the precipice of collapse. But we really don't have time to unpack that right now. And like SCP-3007, a full explanation of this anomaly would take some time and is probably best tackled on its own. But there you have it, folks, Infohazards. They all say that knowing is half the battle, but in this case, it is the whole battle, and if you know, you lose. Not really a battle at all, come to think of it. More of a trap. But whether it's a vicious megafish, a strangely buff man with bull tattoos, a poetic rice bowl, or a nightmarish ordeal of daily hallucinations, there is no doubt that infohazards are some of the most strange and fascinating anomalies that the Foundation has to offer. Oh, and of course, how could we forget the most well-known infohazard of all, SCP-2521. This entity is so infohazardous that its Foundation file entry is written in pictograms. This is because whenever information is recorded about this entity, it manifests and steals it. If you write it down, it'll take the paper. If you make a note of it on a computer, it'll take the computer. And of course, if you talk about it, it'll... Oh no, 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 again, no, 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 no! Ah! Oh, that was a close one. But I'm okay. For now, at least. But don't worry about me. High school is a turbulent time for a lot of us, to say the least. Subjects are a lot harder. Classes feel longer. And because you're older, there can be so much more pressure put on you by your teachers and parents alike. There's a lot more onus for you to perform well in tests and make sure that you get good grades, thanks to everyone around you telling you that these are the most important years of your life, or that your high school experience will determine your whole future for good or for bad. Actually, come to think of it, pressure feels like a bit of an understatement. As if there weren't already enough things to worry about when you're trying to make your way through high school, the changes to yourself get thrown into the mix as well. Growing up and getting older often means developing a further, previously unseen level of self-awareness and understanding of who you are as a person. That can be true of any part of life, but high school can often be the first time we're aware of ourselves in such a heightened way. Usually everything we're experiencing during that time can make some of us self-conscious, shying away from others to avoid embarrassment or becoming brash and loud to overcompensate for just how uncertain they might be feeling deep down. Then, of course, on top of that already huge mountain, romantic feelings get thrown into the mix as well. Sure, in the grand scheme of things, high school romances are usually just tiny, almost insignificant footnotes in the stories of our lives. But obviously, they don't feel like it at the time. When you're right there, living through that part of your life without the benefit of hindsight that comes later, your high school crush can feel like the very center of the entire universe. Being introduced to and surrounded by more people than ever, more than any previous stage of schooling, means that romantic feelings usually have a higher likelihood of developing and are made more prominent by the whole other whirlwind of things that high school brings with it. Case in point, Ellie was having this exact problem. For as long as she could remember, she had never really got people. They were confusing, complicated, and completely unpredictable. Usually, they frustrated Ellie, which made it hard for her to talk to most of her classmates, especially if she didn't already know them that well. The common ground could sometimes make it a little easier. It helped break the ice, but finding those shared interests or similarities was often harder than just spending time on her own. Then came along Marcus, or Marky, as Ellie heard he preferred to be called. On the first day of the semester, she had been placed in a new math class. The second Marky came walking through the door. She immediately found herself unable to keep her eyes off him, especially because he ended up taking the seat directly in front of hers, meaning he was always filling up most of her view when she looked straight ahead. Despite looking like a skater type, from what Ellie observed, Marky was pretty sharp. She was no slouch herself, usually noting down correct answers a few moments before whoever the teacher called on. Whenever Marky was called on, he also had the exact right solution to whatever problem or equation the rest of the class was probably still struggling to keep up with. Despite knowing very little about him, Ellie couldn't help feeling a certain new and unfamiliar way towards this particular classmate. It was like they were both operating at the same speed, on identical wavelengths. If only she knew more about him. And it was during class that Ellie had an idea about how she could get to know him better, but without the awkward, uncomfortable interactions that came from slipping about on the ice rather than breaking it. She could use the doll. Sure, she had been mulling it over, toying with the possibility for a while, but wasn't certain that it was right for her to follow that course of action. But as the days turned into weeks, getting deeper and deeper into the semester brought with it the possibility that another girl would catch Marky's attention the way he had caught Ellie's. Just the thought of that alone made her want to cry. She couldn't bear to see it become reality. One day in class, her chance presented itself on what had been an unusually hot day. The scorching heat outdoors was causing all the students to groan in discomfort, barely able to acknowledge anything other than the high temperature. Meanwhile, all the teachers could possibly do was open up the windows to counteract the relentless weather, but it was nothing more than a futile gesture. Sitting down in front of Ellie, Marky shrugged off the denim jacket he always wore, leaving it to hang over the back of his chair. Her eyes honed in on what she needed. Clinging to the surface of the acid-washed material was a single strand of black hair. She knew she had to pick her moment carefully. If the teacher, or any of the other students in the class, or worst of all, Marky himself saw what she was doing, it would look beyond weird. Leaning forward on her desk as subtly as she could, Ellie slowly reached forward. Her fingers wouldn't reach. The back of Marky's chair was just an inch or two further than her arms extended. Ellie felt her heart stop for a split second as her crush moved in his chair, the shift causing the jacket to move and the strand of his hair dropped, almost falling out of sight. Sighing with relief as silently as she could, when she saw the black streak manage to stay attached to the denim, Ellie fished a pen out from inside her pencil case. Leaning forward again, she delicately lifted the pointed tip of her pen, hooking the hair onto it. Pulling it back towards her before anyone saw, she covered it with her hand, both to hide what she had done and to stop the precious hair from being caught by the warm, humid breeze pouring through the open windows. Gently, she placed the one missing component she needed into a clean tissue, which she then folded 4 times and kept in her jacket, constantly checking throughout the day to make sure it was still there. On more than one of those quick spot checks, Ellie felt her heart plummet downwards for a second when she couldn't immediately feel the tissue in her pocket, only to calm down a second later to realize it was still there, with its precious contents inside too. The rest of the day, she felt tense, drumming her fingers together in impatience, every hour feeling like it would go on forever. It was just a case of waiting out the day until that final bell rung. The moment she was able, she rushed away from the school, walking home as quickly as she possibly could, one hand in her pocket to keep the hair secure. Ellie was lucky enough, or unlucky depending on your view, to live in the same town as her school and not too far away to need the bus. She could make her way there on foot in pretty decent time. Normally the buses from the school would pass her as she walked. Looking up, she saw one of the huge yellow vehicles driving down the street, and a familiar face sat at a window seat. Marky. Seeing him, Ellie quickened her pace, speed-walking home. The moment she unlocked the front door and closed it behind her, she threw off her backpack and raced upstairs to her bedroom. She knew exactly where she'd left it. As she flipped on her lamp, it was laying there on the desk ready for her. The Knotty Stalker. The tiny doll was made of one single knitted string, with a pair of shiny onyx beads against the red of its face in the place of eyes. Ellie had come across the little oddity in a box of her grandmother's things. Although she never knew her all that well after she had died, Ellie's mom had gone to clear her house up and came back with a few boxes full of keepsakes. "These are all your grandma's things I couldn't sell or think of what to do with," her mother explained, offering her the cardboard box. "If you can pick out anything that you like, it's yours, Elle. I'm sure Grandma wouldn't mind." Looking inside, there wasn't much save for a few old clothes, knickknacks, souvenirs, and trinkets that were mostly all broken, or the odd piece of jewelry that looked too worn out and rusted to wear. But right at the bottom was the doll. It was wrapped up in a crumpled piece of paper that might have been clear white at some point, but had changed shades with age. Unfolding it, Ellie read the message inscribed on one side. "Congratulations on your purchase of a genuine Knotty Stalker. Do you love someone but they won't give you the time of day? Do you wish you could hear what they say about you behind their back? Well, wonder no more. Using this fantabulous product, you can keep track of your loved one's every move and their every word. All you have to do is get a single hair from the head of the object of your desires, slip it under a loose string on our Knotty Stalker, and see what you're missing." Another wonderful product, brought to you by the factory. Now that same crumpled note was in Ellie's hands, her eyes scanning over the instructions a final time to make sure she knew exactly what to do. She didn't much care for the name of it though, Knotty Stalker. The latter word had a very negative connotation. What she was doing here wasn't stalking, Ellie told herself. She just wanted an easier way to learn about Marky. Surely there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. Pulling the tissue from her pocket, she carefully lay it flat on the desk and unfolded it. The hair was still there, secured between the thin folded paper. Delicately holding it between her finger and thumb, Ellie held the dark strand of Marky's hair in the light of her desk lamp. She treated it as gently as she could, making sure not to break the hair, worried that the doll might not work if it snapped. Taking great care, she slipped it through one of the loops in the Knotty Stalker's string. For a moment, nothing happened. The doll just lay there on the wooden surface of the desk. It was completely still, not showing even the slightest hint of any change. Feeling the worry building more and more, her heart drumming against her chest so loud that she could practically hear it, Ellie started frantically looking back over the instructions, in case she had somehow missed a step. She had no idea what was meant to happen, or even what she'd been expecting, but she was starting to think that this doll might have just been an oddity from an old toy store that marketed them to children by promising things that weren't actually possible. "See you later, guys." A tiny little voice came from the desk, causing Ellie's heart to lurch in shock. The doll was standing upright on the wooden surface. Only seconds before, it had been lying flat on its back. As if by its own accord, the little knitted figure was upright, like it was a living thing. And it wasn't just standing. Its arm was waving and its chest was even gently undulating to mimic the motion of breathing. The Knotty Stalker kept waving a moment, only to drop its head forward and make an exhaling motion that seemed to be a sigh. "I really wish they wouldn't keep calling me Marky," the same voice spoke up again, this time more clearly coming from the doll. Ellie watched it closer, transfixed with utter fascination. She was aware of the concept of a voodoo doll, a mystical charm that contained a person's hair affixed to a crude figure in order to influence them through magic. This doll seemed much the same, except it was mimicking Marcus's every move. Ellie had overheard him talking to some of his friends in the corridors at school once, talking about home. He lived in the next town over, and the bus must have only just arrived there, because now the doll was walking on the spot The same heavy-limbed, tired walk home after a long, strenuous day at school. She recognized the walk. It was the same one she did when she made her own way back to her mom's house. For the rest of the night, Ellie didn't take her eyes off the Knotty Stalker, watching as it streamed Marcus's actions to her live. She watched in real time as he arrived home, sat and did his homework, and went back downstairs to eat dinner. All the while, Ellie was neglecting to do those same things herself. At one point in the night, the doll started dancing around, singing into something invisible in its hand. It made Ellie smile uncontrollably to watch. She had figured out that Marcus was now playing some music through a pair of headphones or a speaker and singing along in a hairbrush, dancing like no one was watching. The kind of thing that almost everyone does when they're alone, but never admits to. Turning to her computer, keeping one eye on the doll, refusing to stop watching it even in her peripheral vision, Ellie typed the lyrics it was singing into a search engine. Immediately, pages worth of results came up for the song and the band that had sung it. They weren't a group that she had heard of or listened to before, but it was Friday. She had all weekend. Using her mom's card, Ellie ordered herself a t-shirt with the band's name on it. Premium delivery meant it would be there before school next week. On Monday, she showed up at the school wearing the new shirt. It was a few sizes too big, but that meant that the band's logo printed on the front was bigger and harder to miss. Ellie had spent almost her whole weekend watching the doll as it mimicked Marcus's movements. He hadn't done much but play video games and go to the skate park, but she made sure she knew what he was doing. Anytime she wasn't watching, she was listening to the music he liked, getting familiar with it to prepare herself for what was about to happen, as if she had been studying to get ready for a test. Somehow, striding through the corridors full of students milling about first thing in the morning, Ellie felt more confident than ever. "Hey, Marcus," she greeted, spotting her crush rummaging around in his locker and walking straight up to him. "Hey, He paused, looking over her for what felt like the first time. You're, sorry, we have class together, right?" "Math, yeah," she replied, surprising herself at how quickly she'd recovered from the blow that he didn't even know her name. "I'm Ellie. I sit right behind you." Right. Marcus smiled. "You don't have to use my full name. Everyone just calls me Marky around here." "But you don't like that nickname. I can tell." Ellie shot him a smile, trying to do her best mysterious voice. How can you tell?" he asked. "Don't tell anyone?" She leaned forward and whispered, "But I'm kind of psychic." They both laughed, and Ellie caught Marcus's eye reading the band name on her shirt. "Hey, I had no idea that you were a Parallel Lunatics fan," he remarked. "That's my favorite band." "Well, I just started listening to them," Ellie replied. "Maybe you could recommend me some more of their albums?" Suddenly, the school bells sounded, interrupting their conversation with a reminder that the day had to start. Waving goodbye and heading to class, Ellie was unable to stop herself from smiling now that her way in had worked. For the rest of the week, she kept relying on the doll. Every moment she wasn't in class, she was holding it to her ear, listening to Marcus's half of every conversation. The more she did, the more she learned about him, what music he liked, where he was thinking of going to college, and what he wanted to study there. Every time she passed him in the hallway, she'd give him a smile and wave, just to remind him that she was there. It was a long game, but she hoped it would end in the way she wanted. 9 days had passed since she started using the doll, and that's when it started to become somewhat unreliable. Over the weekend, it had been moving as though Marcus was at the skate park again, but when Ellie approached him to ask how his weekend was and if he'd enjoyed going skating, he looked at her with confusion. Marcus said he'd been visiting his dad that weekend and didn't have any time to go anywhere near the skate park. But that one inaccuracy was nothing compared to what she heard the doll say next. Still using it to listen in on Marcus's conversations, the Knotty Stalker had started relaying words that made her heart shatter into 1,000 fragments. She overheard him talking to a friend about her, saying horrible things, like how he thought she was weird and that she had clearly listened to Parallel Lunatics just to get his attention. Worst of all was when Ellie heard Marcus say through the doll that he would never want to date a girl like her. She was heartbroken, tears streaming down her face as she hid in the toilet cubicle during lunch break. Sniffling, wiping her eyes in her baggy band t-shirt, Ellie felt her sadness turning into a wave of rising anger. Throwing the door open, she marched out of the bathroom and started searching the school for Marcus. "How could you say those things about me?" she yelled furiously when she found him sitting on the window ledge halfway up the stairwell. Huh? He mumbled, lifting up his headphones, instantly noticing that she seemed upset. Hey, Ellie, are you okay? You're a jerk, she screamed, almost choking on sobs that threatened to come bursting out in a flood of tears. Why were you saying horrible stuff about me? What are you talking about? Marcus asked, his face looking utterly confused. Don't play dumb. You said I thought I was weird and that you'd never date someone like me. Whoa, Ellie, I don't know who told you that, but that's not true. I mean, I don't know you all that well, but I never say anything like... He tried to reply. Liar! She cut him off with another yell. I heard you. I was listening to every word. What do you mean you were listening? The confusion on Marcus's face quickly turned to concern. In his mind, he was quickly putting two and two together. The band shirt, the question about the skate park. Have you been following me? Instantly, Ellie felt her stomach flip, her anger partially dissipating and replaced with fear. No, it's not like that, she said, trying to ease his look of obvious alarm. I just wanted to know more about you, and now I do. What the hell does that mean? Marcus asked, sounding almost frightened. I know everything about you. Ellie started stepping closer, thinking if she went in for a hug that might calm them both down. I know all your favorite music, what you like to do for fun. I wanted to know because I really like you, but I didn't know how to talk to you. Stay away from me. Instinctively, Marcus's arm, reacting to her getting too close, pushed Ellie backwards. Behind her was nothing but a sharp drop and a flight of concrete steps. With a scream, she tumbled backward, her body barreling down the stairs until her head hit the ground at the bottom of the last stair, giving a sickening crack as her neck broke. Teachers could barely hold back the students that came crowding out, trying to get a better look as the paramedics came to take Ellie away. As they lifted her body onto a stretcher, nobody noticed something fall out of her pocket. An unused Knotty Stalker doll, a brand new instance of SCP-693.
What's up, explorers? Welcome back to the Abandoned Brandon YouTube channel, where we embark on the most extreme urban exploration adventures you've ever seen. We've camped out in an old asylum in England, rummaging through a decommissioned veterinary lab in Belgium, and even got lost in the underground drains of Australia. But now it's time for our most intense investigation yet. Just like my favorite Imagine Dragons song, this one is going to be radioactive. We're heading to the Bezouv Nuclear Power Facility, an abandoned nuclear power plant in rural, well, I probably shouldn't say where it is. Its location is kept secret due to the high risk of potential danger to anyone who goes there. So don't try this at home, kids. But don't worry, me and the rest of the team aren't about to be glowing in the dark anytime soon. The plant hasn't been active for decades. As long as we're careful, nothing can go wrong. Okay, you ready? Let's go.
Abandoned Brandon did not know it, but he would never film another YouTube video. The footage was seized by the SCP Foundation following Brandon's encounter with, well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's just say he was unable to continue his promising YouTube career after. You'll see exactly why in just a little while. For brevity's sake, Brandon's footage has been trimmed down to only the most relevant portions, and we'll be filling in the blanks with additional details for better understanding. The day this fateful footage was shot, Brandon traveled to the Bezouv Nuclear Power Facility, accompanied by his assistant camera operator, his sound engineer, and his newly hired intern. The group had been cautioned against entering the power facility, which was located far away from any houses or hospitals, in the event that they needed help. But they saw this video as their ticket to fame. Chernobyl had recently gotten a great deal of renewed attention, and nuclear power was all the rage. Combine that with an exploration of a nuclear facility most people didn't even know existed, and it would be like printing money. Or so they thought. Getting into the area was easy enough. No one had much interest in breaking into the facility, so there was little need for tight security. There were a few warning signs as the team's rented van approached, mainly to keep anyone from accidentally stumbling onto the place. But radiation levels should have been safe in the area. There was really nothing to worry about, other than the standard risks that always came with trespassing somewhere they weren't supposed to be. That was just the name of the game, the little element of danger that kept their loyal viewers coming back. If anything, the team welcomed the smattering of warnings outside of the facility, making sure to capture some B-roll footage of the signs, written in Russian that they would translate later for their audience. Caution, hazardous materials, turn back toward main. They parked, did a quick sound and camera check to make sure the equipment was working correctly, and headed inside. Brandon led the way, swinging a bright flashlight beam to and fro as he moved. They did all of their explorations in the dead of night, when they were least likely to be caught. Besides, it was spookier to film at night. and that made for more engaging content. Just as they were about to pass the fence and head into the building itself, Brandon's intern piped up.
Are we sure this is safe? Shouldn't we be testing for radiation with one of those, thingies?
Brandon scoffed.
What, a Geiger counter? It's fine. This place has been empty for like ages, and it's not like they had a leak or something anyway.
I don't know, I have a weird feeling about this, the camera operator remarked. Brandon rolled his eyes. If you're too chicken, give me the camera and you can go wait in the van. But not wanting to miss out on the paycheck or deal with the mockery that would surely come later, the camera operator relented. With Brandon still in the lead, the four made their way inside. When it came to eerie atmospheric footage, this place was a gold mine. It had all been left intact, just as it was when operational. But with everything turned off and no activity for decades, it felt truly empty, truly hollow. There was dust on every visible surface, spiderwebs dangling from walls and beams, but it wasn't as dark as they had expected. Were there windows somewhere, letting in moonlight? They couldn't see any. As the group moved further into the facility, Brandon noticed a faint blue glow that bathed everything in a soft, pulsing light. He called out to the camera operator, demanding that he follow close behind. As Brandon tried to find the source of the light, he followed the glow, looking for the place where it shone the brightest. When he found it, he stopped in his tracks, mouth hanging agape. No way. The light was coming from one of the nuclear reactor cores, that pulsing, unmistakable blue. But that wasn't all. There were strange threads growing out of the ground, up and around the reactor cores. I thought this place wasn't active anymore. The cameraman's voice was shaking. It's not supposed to be. Brandon took a step closer to the reactor core closest to him, peering into it. It looked like there was something inside, a strange shape. Can you come here? Zoom in on that. The cameraman shook his head. No way. I'm staying back here. Fine, give me the camera and I'll do it. Brandon took the camera roughly and moved back toward the core. The shape inside. It was like the outline of a person, like a faint shadow there, hiding in the light. Brandon was preparing to continue his investigation of the area when suddenly a pair of screams cut through the stillness of the chamber. The other crew members had to be responsible for the noise. What was that? We should go check! The cameraman insisted. Brandon wanted to protest, but thought about how insensitive that might make him look. The two men headed back toward the entrance to see what had shaken up the others so badly. When they got there, they found the intern and the sound engineer trembling, white-faced and wide-eyed. We need to get out of here, the intern stammered. This place is haunted. Brandon burst out laughing. I thought you guys were hurt or something. You just got scared? Come on, there's no such thing as ghosts. But as soon as he finished his dismissive statement, he spotted motion out of the corner of his eye. He turned to see a faint, glowing, ghostly outline of a man walking down the corridor, walking toward him. He let out a shriek and nearly dropped the camera in shock. He caught it just in time, saving himself thousands of dollars and a lot of trouble. Sure enough, there was what he could only call a ghost right there in front of him. At the sound of his cry, the figure turned to face him and began walking toward him. He took a step back, but the figure waved at him, a gesture so friendly and jarring that he almost started laughing all over again. No way, this place really is haunted. Here, take this. He shoved the camera back into the cameraman's hands. Make sure we're rolling. Sound, are we recording? The engineer, still shaking, nodded. Perfect. He approached the ghost, calling out to it. Hey, we come in peace, Mr. Ghost. My name's Brandon. Can you tell us your name? The figure paused and tilted its head to the side. There was a slight whispering sound, like air rustling through dry leaves, but no discernible words. Whatever this thing was, whether it was a ghost or not, it could not speak. It turned around and began walking away from Brandon and the others. Hey, wait! He called out. He'd found his scoop, the ultimate scoop, the thing that would set him apart from every other YouTuber out there, and he wasn't about to lose it now. Brandon followed the ghostly figure back to the reactor cores, which continued to emit the same blue light. At the side of the glowing reactor cores, the intern piped up again. This can't be safe. We should get out of here. You can go if you want. I'm staying. He watched as the figure walked from core to core, pausing for a moment at each one. He was looking in, checking on the figures inside. What is that? He asked, though he knew the entity could not answer him. After checking every core, it stopped and produced a small cylindrical item, as translucent and ethereal as its body, and held it to its mouth. If Brandon did not know any better, he'd say the ghost was smoking a cigar.
This is too weird, he beamed.
The sound engineer suddenly let out a gasp, nearly dropping his boom microphone.
There's more of them.
Sure enough, 2 more ghostly figures were approaching the group. These new ghosts were smaller, the size of children, and they moved much more quickly. They darted around the floor, chasing each other. They ran right between the sound engineer and the intern, knocking into them both on the way. The intern shuddered and clutched at his stomach. He let out a groan of pain.
I don't feel so good.
Brandon was about to crack a joke at the intern's expense when a sudden searing pain ripped through his abdomen, making him double over. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and when he looked down at his hands, they were shaking uncontrollably. All of a sudden, he felt sick. Not just sick, but deathly ill. His knees wobbled as he tried to stand up straight, as if all the strength had been snapped from his muscles. As much as he wanted to stay and get more footage of these radiation ghosts, he knew the intern was right. Something was very wrong, and they needed to get out of there. The footage they had already captured would have to be enough.
Okay,
He sputtered, fighting the urge to vomit.
let's go.
But the closer they got to the exit, the weaker they all became. The ghosts followed, keeping an eye on the team with concerned expressions, but there was nothing they could do to help. The cameraman began to bleed from the nose, while the sound engineer was coughing up blood with nearly every step. Brandon collapsed to the ground, and the intern had to half carry him the rest of the way. They made it back to the van and made the too long drive to the nearest hospital, but when they arrived, it was already too late. They were all diagnosed with acute radiation sickness, and there was no cure. By the next day, the 4 of them were dead. This incident captivated local authorities, who could not explain why the power facility had become active again, or how a leak this deadly had occurred. But whatever caused it, the radiation levels were highly dangerous, and there were strange rumors circulating about ghosts in the building. Word reached the SCP Foundation, and the location was declared an anomaly. The Bezov nuclear power facility and the 5-mile perimeter that surrounded was fenced off and monitored via security cameras. Radiation sensors were wired to alarms in order to provide an early warning system in the event of a containment breach, unlikely as that would be. The whole place, including any beings haunting it, was designated SCP-1951. SCP-1951 is a series of phenomena in and around the Bezov nuclear power plant in an undisclosed location. Though it was previously condemned and abandoned, it became active again following a series of mysterious events. The first unusual entity observed in the area was a translucent humanoid figure in the shape of an adult man, referred to as SCP-1951-A. SCP-1951-A has not exhibited any hostile behavior and is frequently seen walking around in a leisurely fashion and smoking something resembling a cigar. Like its body, the cigar is translucent. It has a habit of waving at and approaching guards, as if to strike up a conversation, though it is not capable of making any sound. These approaches have resulted in multiple cases of severe radiation poisoning and 2 deaths. The deaths appear to have been unintentional, as SCP-1951-A appears distressed when informed that it had killed 2 guards. It has also since complied with orders from the guards to keep its distance. Due to the entity's incorporeal and dangerous nature, no physical testing can be done on it. Any gunshots fired at the entity will pass through its body harmlessly, and if blown apart with explosives, its body will reform after a few moments. Following its discovery, the SCP Foundation made detailed logs of their observations of SCP-1951 over an 8-month period. The most significant entries in this log have been included in the official file for SCP-1951. First, a new entity was sighted on the grounds of the power plant, similar in appearance to SCP-1951-A, though slightly smaller in stature. This entity was frequently seen with SCP-1951-A, and due to their association and similar nature, was designated SCP-1951-B. The 2 appeared to speak with one another, though of course they produced no detectable sound. They also shared physical contact, including hugs, holding hands, and giving what appeared to be kisses on the cheek and the rest of the face. Though the observing researchers could not be entirely certain, the 2 entities appeared to behave like a couple. Several weeks later, 2 small humanoid figures emerged from the cargo bay of the facility. They resembled the composition of the other 2, but were notably smaller, almost like children.
They were not only childlike in appearance, but in behavior as well. Upon first emerging from the cargo hold, the two chased each other back and forth around the grounds, tapping each other harmlessly when they caught one another. What they were up to quickly became apparent to anyone paying attention. They were playing a game of tag. As the two played their game, SCP-1951-A and B emerged from the ground behind the two child figures and surprised them. There was a sound, a low-frequency moan resembling human speech, and then the group faded from sight. Some months later, radiation from the facility triggered a false alarm, the fifth that week. This suggested an increased output in radiation from SCP-1951. When the Foundation checked in on the area, they spotted 3 additional entities, including another humanoid figure. Out of concern regarding the increasing radiation levels produced by these figures, Command ordered monthly scheduled purges of the facility. During these purges, the area would be bombarded with GV-20 EMP grenades. Following the most recent purge, all of the entities but SCP-1951-A were eliminated or disabled, with the exception of the entities located in the reactor chamber. At this point, radiation levels on the ground were lethal. Any monitoring of SCP-1951 was only possible through exploratory drones. Shortly after the purge, one of the drones returned to Foundation Base, its housing laced with strings of glowing filament. They were arranged to form letters, spelling out words. "You've left Alexei all alone." No communication from SCP-1951 has been documented since. The silhouette of SCP-1951-A, or quite possibly Alexei, can still be seen from time to time. It no longer waves to the guards or tries to greet them. It stands alone, smoking its phantom cigar, and occasionally resting its head in its hands, as if weeping, as if in grief. The hawkfish is a brightly colored, orange-spotted coral reef-dwelling fish with an incredible reproductive talent. Hawkfish may begin their lives as females, but when there are too many female hawkfish in their habitat, they have the ability to turn into males of the same species. This allows the new male hawkfish to take on some of the reproductive burden, allowing the females more mating options. Not only can the hawkfish change its sex, it can also change it back. A hawkfish that has turned male can revert back to female if the population makeup changes and more females are needed. This incredible talent is not limited to hawkfish either. Gender bending is prevalent throughout the animal kingdom. Frogs, bearded dragons, clownfish, and many other animals have the ability to change sex if the situation calls for it. You might be sitting at home wondering, what's with all the animal talk? I came here for an SCP video, not a biology lesson. Well, trust us, we're getting there. While it's simple for many other animals, human beings have a great deal more difficulty changing their sex and gender characteristics. It can require surgery and years of hormone replacement therapy to get the kind of results a clownfish gets overnight. Unless, of course, a human gets their hands on SCP-113. SCP-113 is a small polished red stone resembling a piece of jasper. When studied closely, in spite of its resemblance, it was found to not be jasper or any other identifiable type of rock. When placed against the flesh of a living thing with sex chromosomes, the organism's gender and sex-associated physical characteristics are changed in some way. These effects were first tested on humans with an unnamed D-class. The D-class was placed in a sterile examination room and hooked up to a variety of sensors and equipment designed to monitor their biological state, health, and any other changes to their body that might take place. First, the D-class was instructed to open their hand and close the stone in their fist. This contact between their skin and SCP-113 kickstarted the first stage of the transformation process. Stage 1 lasted approximately 0.2 seconds, as the stone bonded with the cells it was touching, causing a chemical change and leaving a small amount of tissue damage comparable to a mild burn. As soon as this process began, the D-class could not remove the stone from their hand. Unsettled, they attempted to shake the stone loose from their skin, but to no avail. It was firmly attached to the skin and would not be removed until the process was complete. The second stage of transformation followed, lasting approximately 20 seconds. The D-class reported feeling nauseous and promptly vomited on the floor of the exam room. Next, they reported a stinging sensation throughout their body, like being pricked with tiny needles all over.
These sensations have been attributed to a low-level electromagnetic wave released by SCP-113 during this phase, which was picked up by one of the monitors. After the nausea passed, the scientists observing the D-Class's monitors began taking furious notes, shocked at what was occurring. Though the modality of it was unclear, the subject's cellular makeup was beginning to change. Some of their cells were registering as non-human, and others were registering as human stem cells. At this point, the D-Class began to scream in agony. All of the sensory nerves in their body were stimulated at once, and their brain activity was overwhelming at a level similar to a seizure. Finally, once the screaming stopped and the D-Class had gone still, the rock came loose from their hand and clattered to the floor. After this, a full physical was performed, and the D-Class was determined to have undergone dramatic physical changes, all of their primary and secondary sexual characteristics altered permanently. While SCP-113's effect on humans with binary gender identities, male and female, have been studied, it is still difficult to determine the sort of impact that the stone might have on someone with a non-binary gender identity, or if the stone in fact takes gender identity into account at all. There is some evidence that the stone is impacted by gender identity, though this is not always consistent. While SCP-113 alters the physiology of the test subject, it has no impact on the mind. The subject's gender identity remains the same before and after testing with the stone. In the case of one intersex individual who was exposed to the stone, their secondary and primary sex characteristics changed to those that would be more affirming to the individual's gender identity. However, as this is still very inconsistent and unpredictable, not to mention possibly accompanied by side effects that have not been determined yet, SCP-113 should not be considered a safe or viable alternative to gender confirmation surgery for transgender individuals who might be seeking it. Further research is required on the subject. Ordinarily, it is standard scientific practice to test on animals before testing on humans. However, the SCP Foundation isn't exactly known for its standard research practices. After sufficient human trials have been conducted, the Foundation researchers studying SCP-113 decided to test its effects on other non-human organisms. There was a great deal of curiosity about how it might impact various animals, especially those whose sexual dimorphism, or indeed entire relationship to sex and gender, is fundamentally different from that of humans. With standard cats, rats, and dogs, the impact was essentially the same as that on humans. First, the stone binds to the skin. Then it emits an electromagnetic wave causing some nausea and vomiting. Next, the sensory nerves are stimulated for 20 seconds as the cells become altered. Finally, the stone falls away from the skin and the transformation has been completed. Interesting at first, but after the 20th rat, it starts to become a little mundane. However, exposure of certain other species to SCP-113 resulted in some unusual effects. When a number of Komodo dragons were exposed to SCP-113, their chromosomes changed from ZWZZ to WW, resulting in the eventual deaths of the reptiles. When nematodes, which are either male or hermaphroditic, were exposed, no males were produced during the experiment. Male nematodes changed and became hermaphroditic, and the hermaphroditic specimens were completely unaffected as far as the researchers could tell. Earthworms that were exposed to the stone were not transformed at all, and the transformation process stopped during Stage 2 every single time. Several of the previously mentioned animals were used as test subjects as well, in order to determine what effect the stone would have on a creature that already naturally changes its sex characteristics. Clownfish exposed to the stone experienced no change to their sex characteristics, but bizarrely did change color from white and orange to a vivid blue. No adverse effects were identified. Bearded dragons exposed to SCP-113 spontaneously began to lay eggs, which were immediately retrieved and placed into incubators for observation. Once hatched, the eggs contained ordinary baby bearded dragons that seemed to have no altered physiology or residual effects from the stone. The hawkfish exposed to the stone simply transformed the same way they would in the wild, from female to male, just at a faster rate than they would under natural circumstances. The rest of the animals tested had the same result as the earthworm. The stone simply disengaged from the test subject during Stage 2 of the transformation, as if it was giving up. as SCP-113 is classified as safe and only impacts those who deliberately come into physical contact with it. Its containment procedures are relatively simple. The stone is kept in standard storage at Site-23 and may be handled with laboratory gloves. No living being is permitted to be exposed to SCP-113 unless it has been officially approved. If exposed to SCP-113, personnel must be kept under medical observation for 7 days in order to study its impact and make sure no unexpected adverse effects are present. After conducting a variety of animal trials, the research team assigned to SCP-113 became curious yet again about its impact on human test subjects. Not on new subjects, but those that had already been transformed by SCP-113 in one way or another. They wanted to determine what would happen to someone who was re-exposed to the stone. Would it reverse its own effects, essentially turning them back to the person they were before the experiment? Would it transform them further? Would it harm them? In an attempt to find out, several of the original D-Class personnel used in 113's human trials were brought back for another round of experimentation, as well as a new D-Class to test the effects of immediate re-exposure. First, the D-Class who had never been exposed to SCP-113 had the stone placed on his bare arm. Immediately it attached itself to him and the transformation began. After the transformation was complete and the rock detached from his arm, the attending scientists waited a duration of 60 seconds before reattaching it. In order to avoid excessive tissue damage, the stone was placed on his other arm for a second trial. Almost immediately, the subject began to cry out in immense pain, writhing on the exam table and begging for the stone to be removed. Of course, at this point, it had already bound to his cells and could not be taken off. During stage 2, his liver began to swell, and he began to enter the early phases of kidney failure. By the time stage 4 was complete and the stone could be removed, the subject had passed out from the pain. An immediate physical examination determined that the subject had significant damage to his liver and kidneys, as well as a loss of bone density and massive tissue damage on the arm where the stone had been placed. Finally, his genitals appeared to have completely disappeared, leaving a smooth surface behind on the pubic area, like that of a doll. The subject died a few hours later from organ failure and internal bleeding. The rest of the D-Classes were understandably reluctant to be re-exposed to the stone, but unfortunately for them, and luckily for the Foundation, they didn't have much of a choice. Well, that's brutal. Security locked the door to the examination room and the experimentation proceeded as planned. Re-exposure after a significant amount of time had passed had a much higher success rate than immediate re-exposure, and the rest of the test subjects survived their second transformation at the hands of SCP-113. However, it did not return them to the state they were in before their first exposure to the stone. Some of them experienced no physical changes at all, save for a small amount of tissue damage where the stone touched their skin. Others experienced physical changes that had nothing to do with their sex characteristics. One subject's eyes changed color from green to purple, while another subject suffering from male pattern baldness emerged from the experiment with a full head of hair. Some of the changes were more dramatic. One subject ended up with feathers sprouting all over the surface of her skin. Another lost all of his teeth. One particularly odd test subject seemed completely ordinary and unchanged, until his physical examination. During the exam, it was discovered that all of his internal organs had changed places inside of his body. Their configuration turned completely upside down. He seemed otherwise unharmed and able to function as normal, and still works at the Foundation to this day. Even when exposure is spaced out, the more times a person comes into contact with SCP-113, the stranger the effects get. The details have been expunged from the official Foundation file, but there are rumors that one test subject after their 5th exposure to SCP-113 transformed into something completely inhuman and possibly deadly. Like I said, the details have been removed from the file, but word gets around, especially words like claws and acid tentacles. Those could just be rumors, but who knows? Biology is full of mysteries, and there is still so much we do not understand about the natural world and the ways in which living things can transform for better or for much worse. Perhaps some mysteries, especially the mystery of SCP-113, are better left alone. Now go check out SCP-004 12 Rusty Keys and the Door and SCP-500 Panacea for more unusual object SCPs.